Okay, it is 8:30 p.m. Central Standard Time, and welcome to week four, week four of Introduction to Criminal Law. And quarter is moving pretty fast. We only have 2 more weeks after this before this T1 course will be completed. And so I hope that you're keeping up with the assignments. I'm still working on getting the grading out. Don't worry, you'll have it shortly. But do want to encourage you. Please, whatever you do, follow the rubric. I submit your grades, and then I put details in there as to why you lost so many points. And one of the most common things that happen is that students don't read the instructions of the requirement for the written assignment. Most of you have been doing pretty good with the APA, but you either have not had enough pages for the assignment, but it's all right there, and it's all given for you as well. So it is very important. You want to improve your grades. Make sure that you line up with the rubric and make sure that you satisfy that with your written assignments. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. And we're going to go down here to remind you that we have, this is our 4th lecture, and that we have 2 more lectures to go. Week 5, and remember that the lecture for week number 6 will take place the Friday after the lecture on week 5. So you want to make sure that you have that. All right. So I'm going to, I didn't put the recording in here for week number 3. I know I'm sure I sent it out. Let me make sure, because I thought I did. Let me look at my messages that I sent out. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, archive of week 3 lecture. And there it is right there. So let's do this so I can fix that up. So let's go to the course home and add that to it. Bear with me here while I add this to this. There you go. Should be there now. Yep. And then today I will include this lecture as well. Okay, so now let's take a look at our week 4 announcement. Week 4, we're going to discuss crimes against government and public order. In chapter 8, which of the text, which I also sent you the PowerPoints for this week as well. And then we're going to complete some of the activities: domestic terrorism, obstruction of justice, resisting arrest, fleeing police, disorderly conduct, free speech, and then take a brief look at the key terms. And for practice, free speech or disorderly conduct, and then the practice quiz. As some of you already found out that there was a quiz in week 3, which is like basically your midterm, and then there will be one in week 6. But you'll have practice quizzes along the way, which I encourage you. Don't go over them, but to take time because they help prepare you for the real quiz that's going to be timed. And I say it again, it's timed quiz. And then your discussion post. Tonight, obstruction of justice. Initial post is due by 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. And then your reply post is due by Saturday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. Finally, be sure to complete the written assignment, fleeing or eluding police. And I'm going to go over that in a few minutes and remind you to follow the rubric, but I'm going to show it to you again. Complete the mid-quarter student survey as well. So again, let's continue to be strong so that we can continue to finish strong. And you know why my motto is adversity is a springboard to success. I've shared that with you already. Okay, let's go to our calendar. Move this down just a little. Okay, so I have to adjust that to take out this one. Put that one in. There we go. And this is where we are here. Let's move that back up because this is the week that we are here. The 23rd, your reading assignment. Your initial post due today. The lecture taking place now. Your reply post, Saturday. Your written assignment, and then it's due by 11:59 p.m. Saturday. Okay. So, like I said again, that's for week 4, and then week 5 assignments. And you'll notice that next week we'll have 2 lectures. We're going to have a lecture on Tuesday, and then we're going to have our last lecture on the 4th, which is a Friday. Okay, Friday the 4th at 8:30 p.m. Special lecture because the course ends on May 8th. All right, so we're getting down there. Okay, so now let's go back to the module. Okay, module 4. Again, let's go over the assignments. And when we go over the assignments, I will bring you back to the rubric. Again, this talks about the Terry versus Ohio case, which is the temporary stop or brief stop case, we call it. Stop and frisk, as a lot of people refer to it as. And then, so you to answer these questions in your initial post, and then in your reply post, examine another post that contrasts with yours. Defend your position regarding all 4 questions addressed in your initial post. You all have been doing pretty good. I've made a comment to a few of you. Okay, so now here we go with the fleeing and eluding police or eluding police. And this is a 2-part assignment, which you should be familiar with now. The first week was 3 parts. I think since that time it's been 2 parts. Part 1, examine the types of crimes committed. So you'll examine landmark U.S. Supreme Court related to fleeing police and apply laws to a real-world scenario. And the case is right down here. U.S. Supreme Court case, Brower versus Inyo. And then there's a sample pursuit policy involved here. So you're going to deal with that scenario. And in a minimum of 2 pages, you're going to address each of these issues. Okay? And you'll be graded on both parts, not just one part. So you're going to make sure that you complete part 2. Create a flyer, and then you're going to have to do all of these things as well. Okay? So now let's look at the rubric. So you go and click on the assignment, of course. It tells you when it's due. It's due Sunday. 40 possible points. Okay, now here's the rubric. Part 1. You can gain a total of, let's go back to rubric again. You can gain a total of 10, 20, 15, 15, 20, 25 points. Okay, so you can get points for satisfying all of this. Make sure that you meet the 2-page minimum requirement. Make sure that you've answered all of these questions, because I'm going to be reading for it, and then I'll take points off for everything that you don't do. Content and grammar, usually the appropriate paragraph length and everything. Some of you have not lost as many points. Up here is where you lose most of your points. And then make sure that you have citations and references and a cover sheet as well, and that you use reliable sources. And then finally, when you get to the create a flyer to get the remaining 15 points, remember, it's all going to add up to 40, because that's what it is. It's 30, 35, 40, and you want to have 40 points. Explain, your flyer is going to explain the elements that the statute. So you're going to make sure that your flyer is at least 1 page in length as well. And that's for the rubric. Now, when I do my grading, I just go right along and I see, reading the assignment, did you do this? If you did all of this in here, you'll get 15 points. If you do satisfy all of this, your paper is proper in form, no grammatical or spelling or punctuation errors, no sentence fragments, you'll get 5 points. If your APA is on point, you'll get 5 points, and most of you have done pretty good there. And then, depending on whether you satisfied all these requirements, you can get anywhere from 10 points to no points. So you know the difference. If you lose points, you can lose maybe 5 points here, 5 points there. That's 10 points. So that means you got a 30. So it's telling you up front what you need to do, and that's how we grade. That way, it's fair. It's objective. It's based upon making sure that you follow the directions in your written assignments. Okay. Again, that's the rubric, and you want to make sure that you satisfy the same information that you have here. They give a sample statute. They give you stuff to help you. They give you a template to help you as well. Okay? And that's your assignments. And then, of course, you have your live lecture You don't get graded for the mid-quarter survey, but please try to do so, okay? Now, moving right back to the section where we get into the lesson content. So, in dealing with this, crimes against government and public order, we're going to look at laws pertaining to obstruction of justice, resisting arrest and fleeing, differentiate between free speech and disorderly conduct. One's protected by the First Amendment and one is not. Free speech is protected, but disorderly is not. And then these are the sections. I'm going to discuss domestic terrorism, obstruction of justice, resisting arrest, fleeing, disorderly, and then we're going to briefly go over these things right here. We already covered the discussion, the quiz, and the rest down here. So let's go down. So let's look at, in the time that we are living right now, we're in an era right now where there's a whole lot of terrorism that's taking place. Probably the greatest example of domestic terrorism occurred September 11th, 2001 in New York City when the World Trade Center Twin Towers went down. And it was after that remember, we're talking about domestic. That means right here on American soil. We've had other instances. Before that, we also had the Oklahoma City bombing. We've had others. And since that time, we've had the Boston Marathon. And then we've also had a number of shootings that have been classified as terrorism. Because the definition of terrorism is the unlawful use of force or violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government. Remember now, it's not about the individuals, it's about the government itself. So what has happened is that there have been times when terrorism has been used in other definitions, when there have been mass killings. Like, for example, the shooting that took place in Vegas. The question is, was that aimed at a government, or was it just an individual who did some violence? But this is the FBI definition. Some of the other agencies define terrorism on a domestic level as a different form. But anyway, the key thing is that groups like ISIS or any organization outside the United States claims responsibility or is involved with the killing. The killing that took place down in Orlando at the nightclub, that was alleged to be ISIS instigated killing. And so the key thing is that we're dealing with political violence or some social objective. And it says terrorism can be carried out by domestic, that is within the United States, or groups or international groups such as ISIS outside the United States. We're going to talk about international terrorism in a minute. But terrorism can also be targeted at a specific cause, such as eco-terrorism, carried out to further environmentalists and so forth and so on, or at or by a specific entity, such as a state-sponsored terrorism, which is a terrorist act by a state government, not necessarily a state as the United States. So, so that would be like another country. So now let's get into the difference here we're going to talk about. International terrorism involves, based on the United States Code, which is found in Chapter 18 of the United States Code. International terrorism is dangerous to human life, occurs primarily outside the United States, upon U.S. soil by a foreign terrorist organization. So there's some argument that the definition of international terrorism applies to the September 11th killing, and also the Boston Marathon as well. Anyway, that there's a violation of the criminal laws or any state that would be a criminal violation if committed within the jurisdiction of the United States, and that appear to be intended to intimidate. See, here's the deal: groups, countries, states intimidate, coerce a civilian population, influence the policy by intimidation or coercion, affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. So the key thing is, again, I asked the question, is the killing that took place in Vegas international terrorism, or is it terrorism? And so, again, it depends on how you apply the definition here. So the attacks that happened during September 11th are an example of international terrorism because they were carried out on U.S. soil by a foreign terrorist group. So that's the key. So if it happens in, like, for example, we had Pearl Harbor, which is at that time not a state, but it was military base, and it was carried out by the Japanese. That would be a definition of international terrorism. The key thing is that the terrorism is based upon activities of a foreign entity, ISIS, or the Russians, or the Arabs in some of those foreign countries. So it depends. It depends. Okay. We are in an age now where, because domestic terrorism is within our own country, and it says that people in the United States are at risk now more than ever. You can't go to a public event without some kind of incident possibly happening. Therefore, there are metal detectors. Like, for example, I used to go to sporting events, and you could carry in your cooler, and you can carry in your food. But now there's very limited what you can carry in. So and so domestic terrorism has become a way of life, and that we actually live in an era now that, especially since September 11th, again, reminding you that before that, Oklahoma City was a form of that. But looking at some examples here, and it talks about the Oklahoma City incident, committed directly against government, and often the people the government serves and protects. Sometimes the primary target is the government itself. For example, the Olympic Park bomber Eric Rudolph targeted anti-abortion clinics and between 1996 and 98, which resulted in 2 deaths. So this was a form of that because it was directly against a government. In some other instances, the target is the entity, as in the when Timothy McVeigh targeted the federal building in downtown Oklahoma with a bomb that killed 168 people and injured large numbers, about 600 men and women and children. And his reason was to avenge the handling of an earlier incident at Ruby Ridge in Naples, Idaho, where a federal agent was killed along with a 14-year-old child. This Timothy McVeigh believed that the Ruby Ridge was improperly handled and that the death of a 14-year-old child was unnecessary. So his way of coming back was to bomb the building and kill even more. So who deals with investigates acts of terrorism? As you already know, there is now an agency called the Homeland Security, the FBI, the CIA, and other agencies, but those are the main ones. says first responders are involved with terrorism, but the federal government work together with those local responders, the state authorities and local authorities to put together evidence about terrorism. For example, in the state of Oklahoma, the trooper who stopped Timothy McVeigh for a minor registration violation after he had committed the act of bombing apprehended him for the Oklahoma City bombing. So it was a local agency that apprehended him. Then Eric Rudolph was apprehended by a patrol officer who was checking behind a closed strip mall and found him in the area. So the local government generally is who starts and apprehends individuals, but they work together with the federal government. So that's where we talk about domestic terrorism. Again, we're in an era right now where it's like a way of life that we operate in. So now let's talk a little bit about obstruction of justice. The term itself makes it pretty clear what it means. And it's basically concealing the truth. It says it's more than lying or deliberately misleading police or withholding evidence. The justice can happen during a formal criminal proceeding and on the streets. So how you, for example, if you're stopped and asked your name and you give a false name, that's obstruction of justice. But during formal criminal proceedings, perjury is when you don't tell the truth. You've done it intentionally after taking an oath or affirmed. Then you're impeached or caught in an intentional lie. That is obstruction of justice and how it occurs in criminal proceedings. It also can occur, for your information, in front of Congress or a conduit like the FDA if they're doing an investigation and you're under oath. The key thing is if you're under oath, then you perjure yourself. Perjury is a part of obstruction of justice. So when it's dealt on the streets, it talks about what I just said earlier, and in our scenario that we have today in the discussion is that you deliberately mislead the police and not saying who you are or cover up things that you know are not true. It says people are not required to talk to the police, and the Fifth Amendment provides people with the right to remain silent. However, if a person chooses to answer questions and not remain silent, then they must tell the truth. And that's where you get into the obstruction of justice. Lying to a police officer in a criminal law violation because deliberately misleads and prevents the police from performing their duties. For example, as in Kansas says, interference with law enforcement prohibits obstructing and states that interference, obstructing, is falsely reporting to a law enforcement officer, agency, or state investigative agency. So again, if you're stopped and you're asked who you are, and they find out later that you're somebody else, you know, I have had a number of clients through the years when I practiced as a defense attorney who, when they were arrested, they would present false information about their names. But I always used to tell them, I says, when you get booked, it's going to come up when your prints are taken, particularly if you're in the system, and many of them are or were, then it's going to determine who you really are. And then you have these aliases. But it comes back to bite you in a bond hearing, because if you appear in court and you're known as John Jones, also known as John Smith, also known as John Jones, Henry, or John Johnson, all of those, then it lets the court know that you probably have had some contact with the system, and it gives the judge a clear idea that you've been involved with the system before, and it could adversely affect the bond that you end up receiving. So those are the kinds of things that can happen. So that a particular person has committed a crime knowing that such information is false, and intending the officer or agency, and the officer relies upon that information, or that a law enforcement officer has committed misconduct in the performance of their duties, such as providing false reports. That has been going around quite a bit, and that's unfortunate because that means that those officers didn't understand the importance of what we teach at this school in terms of our transferable skill of ethics. And if you operate in an ethical fashion, you won't find yourself in this situation. But more and more those are coming out, not mistakes, but I'm talking about reports that are proved to be wrong based upon subsequent production of cameras, as to body cams, audit dash cams, and cell phone cams about what really happens in the incident. So that's when we get to that particular point. Any information knowing such information is false, intending to influence, impede, or obstruct such an officer's agency or agency's duty. And it goes on and it names destroying or materially altering evidence, knowingly obstructing, resisting, or opposing any person authorized by law to serve process, that is to serve summons or subpoenas, and or writ or warrants in the discharge of their duties. So anyway, there's an article which describes a real world obstruction case in which a homicide investigation involved. So you can take the time and read that. She knew prosecutor says of Orlando's gunman wife, so I'm not going to go over that now. And finally, we're dealing with some states wherein it requires obstruction of law includes identifying yourself, and I already talked about that. Although similar to obstruction, making a false statement to identify yourself, a lot of jurisdictions include that in that same area of obstruction of justice. Failure to, such as this is Ohio, failure to disclose personal information states that no person who is in a public area shall refuse to disclose their name, address, or date of birth when requested by a law enforcement who reasonably suspects either that the person is committing, has committed, or is about to commit a criminal offense. Then the person witnessed by any of the following: an offense of violence, that would be a felony offense that causes or results in or creates a substantial risk of serious physical injury to another or property. So it's a whole bunch of things. Ohio goes further to say anybody in Ohio who has engaged in or witnessed any of the actions above must identify themselves when requested. So the point of identifying yourself is not necessarily self-incrimination. So you have to volunteer that information. It says a person who fails to disclose their personal information can be arrested for a misdemeanor. Nothing within the statute requires the individual to answer questions or provide information beyond the personal information. And that's the same thing as providing false information on a personal level. Ohio is also the place where Terry versus Ohio, the famous stop and frisk case that we talk about. So I will not go over that case, but you can take time to look at it. I encourage you to look at it as far as completing your assignment and understanding overall the big portions about what obstruction of justice. So if the police ask, do you have to give your name out? Recent court decisions say that individuals generally do not enjoy a constitutional right to refuse to reveal their names by law enforcement officers. So you can click on that and you'll see more details. And then these are references. So moving right along to resisting arrest. So if a person obstructs police and arrest, so when does an arrest occur? Arrest occurs when an individual is not free to go. When a person is placed under arrest and there is resistance by any suspect, it's considered as resisting arrest. So if you're under arrest, you should comply with what the officer is saying, even if it doesn't appear, even if you haven't been adjudicated, because they're just determining based upon the circumstances or some information that they have. In order to ensure that a resisting charge is successful, the person must know that they're under arrest first. So a person placed under arrest by the word or actions of law enforcement officer and bringing an arrested person under control and the will of the officer. In other words, you're not free to go. What are some indicators? Obviously, one is you're under arrest. The other one might be placing handcuffs on you, and it can be explicit or implied. Explicit custody is clear and leaves little room, for example, when law enforcement says you're under arrest and directs the person what to do and then handcuffs them. Implicit custody is not as clear and is concerned with what a reasonable person would believe at the time. So when the individual believes that they are not free to leave, that's what I said, during a police encounter, they may perceive that they are indeed under arrest and must comply with the officer's request. Police officers must be constantly mindful of whether or not a person is under arrest, either implicitly or explicitly. Most of the time, the key thing is to explicitly indicate that. And then, of course, we get to the questioning of an individual. You know, if they're in custody, yes, Miranda kicks in, and you must give the Miranda rights. So resisting arrest, it says, takes many forms. Assaulting the police officer, punching or kicking of an officer, or tries to do something to stop them from being placed under arrest. Okay, and in many states, it's a Class A misdemeanor. Okay, and these are references. So now let's move on to police, fleeing the police. So if the police are evidently chasing you and you take off and you know that they're doing that, it could be from foot or in a vehicle, and it's dangerous to people, particularly when you're dealing with vehicles because of high-speed chase that take place. But there are many departments have policies about this because you endanger innocent people as well. And many police officers have been injured and killed during a foot chase, but more police officers, innocent civilians, are seriously injured during vehicle pursuits. And I mean, totally innocent people. All states have criminal laws that prohibit fleeing from the police in a vehicle. And that's the main thing that we're going to concentrate on here. So fleeing or eluding a police with a vehicle is when you fail to stop after, the police have either said stop or either lights or siren, and you continue actively to flee. Or you engage in where they have to chase, increasing their speed, maneuvering, all those different things, and it's unlawful fleeing a police officer in a motor vehicle in the third degree contains similar elements related to the explanation of fleeing or eluding, and states a person guilty of unlawful, this is New York here, unlawfully fleeing a police officer or motor vehicle in the third degree when knowing that they have been told to stop, I'm paraphrasing it, by a uniformed officer or either a marked vehicle of either lights, or he or she thereafter attempts to flee such an officer by such vehicle by driving at speeds which equal or excess 25 miles per hour above the speed limit, is engaged in reckless driving. So there was really, remember the OJ case? That wouldn't fit the definition because there wasn't any eluding in terms of speed. That was more like a cruise. And most pursuits don't operate that way. Most operate the way that is described in this statute. Okay. The officer has the responsibility to make sure that they're following their department policy. And I said earlier at the outset that most departments have policies that must be followed in dealing with reckless or vehicle pursuits and things like that. Okay. During pursuit driving, due regard elements that police have to consider are the time of the day, the pedestrian traffic, the nature of the offense, weather and road speeds, and then that officer's driving ability. Okay. And then there are some sample police pursuit policies here, which are here, and then also in your assignment you have as well. And then we get to the force to stop techniques, such as how do you make them stop? You ram the vehicle or a roadblock, or I know that there are times when there are spikes put in the streets so that the individual gets flat tires. So in order to use these techniques, deadly force must be justified. Justified for using deadly force is any behavior that imminently causes or threatens to do great bodily harm or death to a police officer or another person. Short of that, you can't do it. In order to use these techniques, deadly force must be justified. Okay, must. I said must. Sometimes people think, doesn't the mere fact of fleeing from the police in a vehicle create an imminent threat of great bodily harm or death? There's a whole lot of factors involved, and depends on the scenario, and about what is going on or taking place. So that's how things work. So then you might be thinking about some of these. Here's some examples. A fleeing driver suspected of a felony increases speed to 45 in a 30, but the suspect stops at all lights, uses turn signals. These driving behaviors alone are not overly dangerous, so it wouldn't be right to ram them. The same suspect in a scenario traveling at 90 miles an hour makes sudden turns, drives through signals, nearly hits motorists, it would be justified. So the key thing is looking at all the circumstances about how that individual that you're pursuing is driving. And there's a Supreme Court case which we talked about, which is included in your assignment, Scott versus Harris. If you read that, then you'll get some factors that will help you to understand that. And then there's some induce to stop techniques, which I won't go over here. It shows you how you're trained in the academy how to stop vehicles. So we're going to conclude with dealing with the issue of disorderly conduct and free speech. And so, although the First Amendment protects free speech, not all speech is protected. And to maintain peace and order in society, some forms of speech, such as inflaming someone to fight, inciting someone with fighting words, disorderly conduct, or breach of peace laws will kick in. And it gives some examples in some of these statutes. For example, every person who maliciously and willfully disturbs the peace or quiet of any neighborhood, family, or person by loud or unusual noise, by threatening, quarreling, and so forth, is guilty of a misdemeanor. Other laws, such as harassment, threats, libel, and slander, also forbid speech that would violate these laws. So police officers are called a lot of times to disturbances or peaceful protests where free speech is being expressed. The main function of police in that situation is to protect the constitutional rights of the individual, even if you don't agree with what they're doing. Like, for example, I know there's areas where the Nazis have had demonstrations in areas where there were people such as the Klan in a black community, which is not very often, but it happens sometimes. But the Nazis in a predominantly Jewish community have been able to do so. So, according to Black's Law Dictionary, which is a popular dictionary that we as law school use frequently, a riot is a tumultuous disturbance of the peace by 3 or more persons. So it's not 2. Obviously, it's not 1. Assembling together their own authority with the intent, their idea is to mutually assist each other against anyone who shall oppose. Okay, riots often result in a lot of property loss, some injuries, and sometimes even in death. Okay. So now let's take, well, we're not going to go through this whole thing, but I'm going to share with you this, if you get a chance to take a look at this, these examples here. This is a 35-minute piece. So,
coming up on this edition of In the Line of Duty. In an instant, any community can host a crisis. It can become the focus not only of local attention, but of national and international attention, too. We spent 2 hours inside this riot zone and watched this thing evolve around us. A hungry, competitive, and sometimes frenzied media can put you, your department, and your resources to the test. And eventually, I found myself being overwhelmed by the enormous amount of media. It's about 7:30 right now, and police helicopters are starting to arrive. And when the reporters come and start taking pictures and asking questions, you'd better be ready, because the pressure will be on the rawest rookie as well as the most seasoned veteran. Dealing with the media has become a critical element for every rank in law enforcement. We had a lot of media there because a police officer had shot someone. What also made the news value much more exaggerated was the fact that the officer was white and the victim was black. Lessons learned by the officers involved in the line of duty. It may be charitable to say that relations between the media and law enforcement are more often strained than not. Hello, welcome to In the Line of Duty. I'm Ron Barber. And I'm Don Marsh. That's because there is a basic conflict between those who want to evaluate information carefully and those who want to disseminate that same information quickly. We are not going to have this case tried in media. I don't know where you get some reports from. I know that we haven't issued any such report with respect to that individual. Police have checked every lead and have found nothing, but news organizations are pouring in, feeding the frenzy. We received well over 400 calls from media from all over the world, and now we just have to deal with it. What has happened in the past 30 hours here has police convinced. The intense media coverage is now hindering as much as it is helping, making people see the suspected killer behind every tree. Clearly, the relationship between cops and reporters is often adversarial. In sensitive, ongoing criminal cases, police have to protect the integrity of their information.
Not as much, but I did speak to a police spokeswoman. You see some day video here.
In major incidents, they're often preoccupied with protecting lives, and the last thing they need are the lights, cameras, and the often unpredictable and intrusive action of the media. The murder of designer Gianni Versace put Miami in the spotlight, and the search for killer Andrew Cunanan kept it there. Misinformation about Cunanan's death cost the Miami information officer his job and kept the chief on the hot seat.
First, a gang of 5 young thugs who call themselves the Lords of Chaos out on a
When 5 students killed a teacher near Fort Myers, Florida, the community was besieged. And the Lee County Sheriff's Department was prepared with an orderly and timely dissemination of information. Incidents like this you just have to be prepared for to a certain degree with your sheriff or your chief of police ready to take on the onslaught and keep it focused. The Jean-Benet Ramsey murder case brought the media to Boulder, and reporters stayed as the investigation dragged on and on and on. How many media people are in Boulder right now? 300. We have been absolutely barraged by media. And this relationship is nothing new. It goes way back. Investigators, prosecutors, victims, all have had to cope with the media. Even today's most celebrated cases pale in comparison to the media involvement in the Lindbergh kidnapping. And that was before the media was anything like we know it today. And in St. Petersburg, 2 incidents 3 weeks apart, as analyzed in Volume 2, Program 12 of In the Line of Duty, brought the Florida community into sharp and unanticipated focus. It was the big one, which brought not only local, but national and international media as well. Sometimes it's overwhelming. We found that you thought that the phone calls would never end. You see and you watch television on another city having a major incident, and you sympathize with that. Gosh, I'm glad that's not me. I'm glad I don't have to go through that. But when it happens to you, you can't believe the enormity of the amount of phone calls that you're going to get. The national attention is going to be directed toward you from media all over the country. St. Petersburg had become a major news story, and that brings a special kind of baggage in these days of intense media competition. The competition has become very great to the point of there is a fine line between going over the line and doing what the police would like you to do as opposed to I'm going to get the story, no matter what. They're all trying to get their own story. And so it's like, I'll go over there if the rest of them go over because my editor will get me if I don't come back with the story. Everything is so immediate. In the old days, everything was at 6 o'clock news and that was about it. Where now we'd be looking at 5 o'clock news, the 6 o'clock news, 11 o'clock, midnight, 6 in the morning, 5 in the morning, middays. We have one station doing an 11 o'clock mid-morning news. So there are continuous requests and continuous demands for information almost all day long. The St. Pete scenario. The media initially did not honor the police line. Live reports included inaccurate reportage. There was media frustration because of a lack of solid information. And go ahead and expect it. There is going to be a lot of confusion. And that's one thing that we've been working on is the coordination of information and between all of the agencies, the field force, command post, and back where the chief is.
Dean, let me ask you, what was your sense of how the officers handled
Fed by the intensity of the incident, the lack of information, and a fiercely competitive television market, TV reporters became a part of the story they were covering. People of different breed. The law enforcement agency, the cop on the beat, tends to see the television guy as the guy that's sort of getting in the way. He's the guy with the camera, the lights. He's illuminating things that he should be illuminating. The print guy, he's got, now they're there, and they've got the big lens on, and they're shooting, from the back, and the print people are around doing neighborhoods and getting quotes from everybody, but they're not as intimidating, visually seen as much as the television people are. Reporters, especially inexperienced reporters, TV or print, frequently don't understand the danger they can be in, and officers cannot be expected to worry about them. I tend to work in an atmosphere, and I don't care where they are. They don't want to do a good job, fine. But I don't assign any of my officers to protect them or anything like that. They're out there on their own. Media people can find themselves in the middle of the melee. Television lights draw unwanted attention to officers and reporters with unwanted and dangerous illumination. This night in St. Pete, a reporter's personal car, a news van, and a police cruiser were attacked and destroyed by fire. Every time they would turn on the camera lights, because now we're talking after dark, that would agitate the people even more, because now it's performance time. I'm going to perform for the cameras. And it played into the hands of the agitating group that was out there stirring up the crowd. And now we have the media just going right along with this thing and keep stirring it up. We were taking rocks and bottles from the south, and one of the local reporters was down behind my cruiser, using my cruiser as a shield. Well, right after that, we deployed gas. Obviously, she didn't have a gas mask or anything, and I think if I had had a camera with me, I would have ended up with cover for Look or Life magazine, and she was in pretty much distress and disarray after sucking in that tear gas. The Barbie doll looks a little different in the best condition. Yeah, a little bit different. And the incidents vividly reinforce St. Petersburg's commitment to and the need for having an ongoing plan for dealing with the media. But even the best laid plans can have their cracks. In St. Petersburg's case, veteran information officer Bill Danielle happened to be out of town at the time of the first incident. He was not there to implement his standard procedure of using personal relationships. The first thing I would have done is immediately recognize that tensions were becoming very hostile. All of the reporters I know, work with them daily, work with them for years, would have gone around to them and you would certainly encourage them to follow your command. Had they chosen not to do that, then we could have taken some other action to get them back behind the police lines to see that they were causing more of the problem at that point. Media relations trainer consultant Rick Rosenthal has the following advice when dealing with a big one. Every department needs a public information standard operating procedure. When speaking with the media, keep it simple. Limit your comments to the facts and avoid adjectives. Anticipate frequent updates and specify a central location for disseminating information. Help reporters gather the facts. If you don't, they will likely find less reliable sources. Expect cell phones to overload. Expect pagers to overload. Anticipate television helicopters and be prepared to deal with them if they become intrusive. Helicopters can be a problem, as they found out in suburban St. Louis during a delicate negotiation with a man bent on suicide. The chopper was disruptive, annoyed the subject, and almost blew the negotiation. On the other hand, this news pilot in Arizona actually helped capture a suspect. He did in his helicopter what officers and cars couldn't do, follow the suspect. In St. Louis or St. Petersburg, law enforcement must learn to manage the media. If it cannot be controlled per se, it can be managed to your department's advantage. The media may be present at any incident, large or small. The most important objective in all cases, large or small, is to professionally disseminate accurate information from a convenient place with a designated spokesperson. A misstep with the media can haunt an individual officer or an entire department for a long, long time. So what we did is we moved all of the press staging area, all of the press statements, over to the fire department, where we had a room set up with telephones, podium, and light, and all of that, and it was a more controlled atmosphere to make that type of statement. And then the chief, the mayor, and I, and the fire chief, briefed them, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and then one late night. So there was a continuous formal statement about what the action was and what the situation was in the city. As bad as the second incident was in St. Petersburg, it was a learning experience for Danielle and the media. One lesson, an established rapport can have long-term advantage. I was dealing with the same people that we had been through all of the press conferences and all of the ABC and the NBC and the CBS people who were in town, the Washington Post, New York Times. All of those individuals were in town, and we had dealt with them before, so it made it a little easier at the same time. But incidents like this one draw multiple crews from the same organization, gathering information independently. Sorting fact from fiction can be a problem. This is where experience counts on both sides. The reporters who were senior tended to work more closely with the officers, and they've been around a long time, and they've been in other incidents, so they're not going to put themselves in danger going and get shot. It's usually the new reporter, the person who is fairly new to beat, maybe just as a new hire or something like that. That person's out trying to make a name for himself, and that's the person that tended to get himself in trouble or herself in trouble. Which is why it's so important to know in advance who you're dealing with. Every reporter that is assigned to our beat comes in, and I sit down with that person and go over the press policy of our department. Now, a lot of departments may have a one-sheet press policy. In our situation, we have a 7-page press policy, so I like to go over that and let them know our job is not to prevent them from doing their job, but to accommodate them and to respond to their request for information. We realize they have a job to do, but we also have a job to do. Fact is, the media and law enforcement often have objectives which are in conflict. But I think it's understandable that people in this country would have the kind of interest that they have, and we will try to accommodate that without prejudicing what I know must be the hope of all of the people that are or most of the people that are watching this case, and that is that we can get at justice at the end. The public needs to know what is happening in our city. Is it burning down, or is it confined to just one street in the city, as opposed to what the media was leading the public to believe, that the whole south side of the city was burning down? That was not true. Providing accurate information also provides an opportunity for law enforcement. You're going to have those hard copy type stories, and you're going to have a lot of people that's going to do that, and we realize that's going to happen. But what we try very hard to do in our city is to try to present, the image that our public expects of its police department, and that's from the chief of police right on down to the U.S. rookie. Hopefully, we're going to have the very best police officer that we can and make that presentation. No matter where you are, no matter what the size of your agency, you can be faced with an avalanche of media coverage. St. Petersburg, Boulder, Miami, and Los Angeles can attest to that. But so can Waco, Ruby Ridge, and East Moriches, New York, besieged after TWA Flight 800 went down. More chiefs of police today are realizing that the media in their market, it used to be in the old days, well, I'm out here in the country, I'm 50 miles away from the nearest television station, they won't cover me. Don't believe that. Because if you have a major incident, it may not be a riot, but it could be a major airplane crash, and you've got dead bodies all over the field. You're going to have the national media covering that, and they're going to come in from all over the place, and they're going to be getting helicopters to fly them in. Money is no object at that point, so you're going to have MSNBC and CNN plus all of the local people, and they're going to be there doing live shots.
Okay, we're back here live at the triage area. They just loaded somebody into an ambulance.
Live shots from the scene or as close to it as possible. Reporters will often do them extemporaneously, leaving wide open the opportunity for speculation and mistakes unless they have been given accurate information. It is as important to know how to provide it as it is for the media to know how to use it.
Every time I've written a story about
statute that explains the procedure or the philosophy and not the details of the case. It seems to have a very good effect on everybody. I'm more than comfortable to return every one of your calls to provide you any information you want about how we procedurally do things. What I will not talk to you about is the specific procedures that we are following in this case and the specific facts of this case.
In the line of duty media advisor, Jim Brady found the following guidelines work well for the 650-man St. Louis County Police Department during his 21 years as the PIO, or Public Information Officer there. He says the guidelines work well for both major incidents and lesser ones. All officers must be trained to recognize the value to the department of positive media relations. The chief answers questions regarding policy and administrative matters. The PIO serves as the liaison between the chief and the media, setting up interviews and news conferences, etc. The PIO prepares written news releases and answers most reporter inquiries about routine happenings. He or she refers the reporters to supervisors or primary investigators when more detailed information is required. The more information provided to the PIO by supervisors, the less they will probably be called upon for involvement in routine situations. Major incidents or ongoing criminal investigation requires specific responsibilities determined in advance planning. The scene commander or chief investigator must coordinate immediately with the PIO. After the PIO is provided with the basic situation information, a joint decision should be made regarding necessary media restrictions, where and when initial briefings will be made, and by whom. The scene commander or chief investigator are always first choice. Department spokesman is last resort when commanders and supervisors are not available. In a best-case scenario, the PIO establishes the procedures and ranking commissioned officers provide the information when there is something new to report. Speaking to the news media must be part of their job. One of the responsibilities of police officers or patrolmen assigned to the perimeters to seal the crime scene from outsiders is to direct reporters and camera crews to the established media area where the PIO is waiting. These officers should always follow department policy and never attempt to answer questions about which they have no direct knowledge.
I have really no information relating to this. I have no information, nor do I want to comment with respect to anything that comes to us that I've talked about. Sorry?
When you make your statements, they all have to be done back at whatever location that is. And I would not recommend trying to do formal department statements out on the scene, because it's not a situation where it's going to be conducive to that. It's vital that a chief of police certainly should have someone designated to be that intermediary in dealing with the media. And the contacts that you have with the media can't be started at the time that the riot is just beginning. You've got to have those contacts with the news directors, with the assignment editors, with the senior reporter on the beat, the person who's going to be covering that. You have to have that liaison, have to have that dialogue with him, certainly sitting down in your office as we're doing here today, and not when the incident is beginning. It has to be someone who has the ability, though, to be able to sit down and to develop the liaison. Now, if the chief gives that assignment to someone who dislikes the media initially, then it's going to be a no-win situation. Just plan for that worst-case scenario. Go ahead and have that location designated where you would have the press conference, where you're going to be meeting, where all of these remote trucks and satellite trucks are going to be parked. Have that location. Have your people that are going to answer the telephone. These are going to be the people that answer the telephone from the public. These are going to be the people that answer the telephone from the media. Who's going to be the primary spokesman? Keeping in mind only have one spokesman. If you start having 3 or 4 spokesmen, then you start having people making conflicting statements. And then with conflicting statements, then nobody knows what really is the truth. So you want to have one spokesman per statement that's going to be made.
And because you can't plan the time of an incident, be sure there's a designated hitter to deal with the media if the regular information officer is sick or out of town. The entire information staff must be designated so the team can be pulled together at a moment's notice for duty at the station, the scene, and the command post.
And I want to know, who is this person that I'm going to be dealing with? Who is this person that's going to be looking for a soundbite from me at a crime scene? I want to know who I'm dealing with before that person either is writing that information down or putting a microphone up to me. And certainly you don't lie to the media. You don't stonewall them in a way or try to get them going in a different direction. You try to be honest and upfront with them so that they can accomplish, their mission. One of the biggest problems that law enforcement has is thinking that they can lie to somebody and that a reporter then is going to forgive them. And the reporter really never forgets that. Once you start lying to someone, your whole credibility is right out the window, and that's not what our police department's all about. They would like all of the information all of the time. It's not a case, they may understand why you won't give them information, but they're going to ask for that information. And one of the biggest problems law enforcement has, and officers and detectives and all have, is getting mad at a reporter for asking a question that they don't want to answer. Now, you can sit there as a reporter and ask me a question, and I don't want to answer that, or I can't through guidelines or whatever. But as a professional, I shouldn't get mad at you for asking me that question. But I've seen many law enforcement people get mad at a reporter for asking sensitive questions, and you just can't do that. You've got to understand that those questions are going to be asked. The camera here that's recording us, major, very powerful too. A lot of people reading, seeing, hearing about your police department. And as we try to point out, how do you come off, Mr. Detective or Mr. Officer? The public is watching, and they say, well, gosh, no wonder they can't solve any crimes in that town. Look at this guy. He can't even explain something on television. The reporter has about 90 seconds to tell his story. You, as the representative of your company or of your police department, you've got about 10 to 12 seconds to tell your story. Now, can you do it? It takes practice in order to be able to do that. More than likely, when you're out guarding a crime scene, the media is going to come up and ask you what's going on. Now, what the newest rookie can do is very easy for that person, because he can say, well, my sergeant will be more than happy, and he's right down the street. About all the rookie knows that we've had a shooting, and my post is here is to try to prevent the public coming into my particular area. Sergeants is a different matter. Unless it involves policy is usually presented back to the administration. We respond to that, but we encourage the sergeants. We work on sitting as we're doing here today, talking to a camera and knowing all of the little things that the cameras do, the B-roll, the terminology that the media uses, so that it's not an imposing thing, but it's something that they see of accommodating their investigation. The people in our criminal investigation division continually use the media to help them in their investigations. We have press conferences very often. The pictures, the lost person, the found body, the skull and bones. Have you seen the homicide? And this is information that we have. So we work very closely with the media, helping us on investigations.
There is value in ensuring good coverage because it gives you the chance to show the public the effective job you are doing. Historically, the media know more about how law enforcement operates than law enforcement knows about the media. Get to know reporters, news managers, and learn what their problems are as you are explaining yours. And when the incident is over, conduct an after-action review. Work with the media on how both sides can do a better job.
We are not going to have this case tried in media.
The basic rules for major incidents also apply to more routine incidents. Don't be afraid not to answer a question.
Very simply, you can just say, that's an active, ongoing investigation. I can't make a statement this time. But when the investigation is completed under the Florida law, then we're going to provide you with all of that case.
It's permissible to ask reporters to withhold delicate or confidential information they might have come up with. Danielle says, whatever you do, stay on the record and make sure reporters know what that means. On and off the record mean different things to different people. In the line of duty is Jim Brady, a veteran of both media and law enforcement, favors these definitions. On the record, reporters may use anything you say and attribute it to you. Off the record, nothing said is to be used or attributed. It is Brady's experience that going off the record almost never benefits the police and only creates the worry about whether the reporter will honor the commitment. If you decided to go off the record anyway, remember to announce it up front. The comment, "That's off the record after you've said something you regret," is not acceptable. Not for attribution. For background purposes, these comments may be used, but not attributed.
Most people don't understand that there is terminology such as off the record, background, not for attribution, and all of that, and I try to explain that in the classes that we do. Are you obligated to talk? Not unless you are ready to make a public statement at that time. If it's not the right time to make the statement, then you need to tell the media that.
You have the same right of spin control the reporter does.
If you sit down to do a story with me, one of the first things I'm going to ask you is what is the slant of your story? Every reporter is going to have some direction that he's going to be taking that story. So it is going to be beneficial to me to know what direction you're going to be going with that story. And while you're telling me that, I'm trying to hopefully get my thoughts in there so that I can make an appropriate response.
This may enable you to detect and avoid a reporter's attempt at sensationalism.
What we have to do in the business is to be just very careful on what we put out to be factual and presented in a very professional way. If we become clinging to the role of being sensational, then the public doesn't see really the professional police department that I would like for them to see.
Now some questions. Does your department have a policy on dealing with the media? If so, when was the last time all department members reviewed it? If not, is it time to develop a policy? Does your department have a public information officer? What is his or her role concerning the media? How can the media be helpful to law enforcement? How can the media hinder law enforcement? Discuss the last incident in which you had to deal with the media. List the pros and cons. What did you learn from the encounter? Who on the department should be trained in dealing with the media?
Okay, that's all that I wanted to share with you regarding that. So you learned quite a bit about how law enforcement deals with riot situations or events, and what they have to deal with concerning how they must conduct themselves with the media. It's very important because I can tell you that there are times when criminal investigations can be impeded by the police not doing a very good job at it. So anyway, went a little longer because I wanted you to see that video. So what I'm looking for is free speech. That's the key. Free speech. Okay? I hope to see you next week. Good night.